Does deep cleaning your entire bathroom before it's dismantled and renovated by tradesmen seem like a ridiculous thing to do? It's a bit messy, and I feel like I need them to see that I'm actually a normal person who's on top of things. At least if there's something horrible in the walls, I can say, oh really? I didn't know, because I can't see inside walls. Whereas, if they turn up next week and see that the sink isn't in great shape and the shower could do with a bit of a scrub, what do I say? They could be here for days, which is at least one more day than I would reluctantly host my closest friends or family. Let me know in the comments. Today's video is about Grave Empires by Richard Swan. Thanks firstly to NetGalley and Orbit for the arc. How to summarise this book? Master and Commander with a dash of trans-dimensional demonic horror. How's that? The biggest difference between this book and the previous series? Swan has made the switch from first person to third person. Probably not easy, but I prefer books in this style, so big love for that. We're veering into Industrial Revolution territory,
where there was work for mum, dad, and even the kids.
In this new era, which is always interesting for a fantasy series. It's a fun age to do fantasy in. One of the many subjects in this book includes capitalism. I think chiefly, how does capitalism deal with the end of the world? Seemingly, they would try to make a profit out of it, naturally. The religion of the day is now Nema Victoria, which is a clever injective for Victorian terminology into this world. Bravo, Swan. So now onto what I liked and loved. I've been reading this book alongside another book by a chap named Glubb called The Fate of Empires. This guy basically believes that empires last on average 250 years and gave a few examples. I loved Glubb's writing. I do think his end date for a number of those empires he listed above is perhaps for debate, amongst perhaps some of his other opinions. Anyway, more interestingly, he spoke of the different stages of empire. I do agree with, to some extent, and it was fun to read it alongside this book, when Swan would add in quotes such as, "We can threaten to shoot our enemies, but it is much cheaper to pay them," from chapter 10, which does give us an idea of where Sova is on this lifespan of empire. I'd like to speak about characters, as if I'm honest, it's all I care about. I have a favourite character type. It's the one my own writing always seems to favour. One that's rooted in the deeply cowardly, the often humiliated, the very real pathetic man. They're funny because they're self-aware and yet so definitely deranged, but in a relatable way. Also, Dan Luther from The Age of Madness is one such. Wooster from the Jeeves and Wooster books. Another here is von Oldenburg. It was von Oldenburg that truly stole the show for me. He is absolutely batshit, and a character you might think only exists in stories. And yet, live long enough in the world, you will meet a few of him. I for one was delighted to meet this type of man again here in Lamprecht von Oldenburg, reassured of course by the fact I'm only meeting him in fiction. There's a lot of fun to be had with von Oldenburg and his witch courtesan, very divorced law firm partner and their art girlfriend, if that makes sense. These chapters made me laugh routinely, and I mean that I audibly laughed rather than a simple smirk. At times he is downright evil, but to read his internal monologue, we see him almost as a Dick Dastardly style character. I especially loved his obsession with the mechanism.
Think what it's doing to the mechanism,
which had a touch of the arcane to it. Swan has given much more wit to this book than his previous trilogy, which balances well with the ambassadorial Renata chapters and the almost Kubrickian Lieutenant Peter chapters. But as I say, von Oldenburg is why I'll be pre-ordering the next two in this trilogy. I simply cannot wait to see what type of Wallace and Gromit shit von Oldenburg gets up to with his new toys. I love Lieutenant Peter a lot. The young officer who is sent out to give the Casimir and their barbarian dogs a good thrashing, eh? I thought I knew where this part of the story was going, and I was all wrong. Sure, there is a lot of British officer batter, and at times Peter's sections felt like the Terror, but with the fantasy dial twisted up to 11 and then ripped off the amp entirely. As I read his descent into madness and witnessed the arcane horror of it all, I couldn't help feeling like I was witnessing Willard from Apocalypse Now coming face to face with creatures from the island of Dr. Moreau. Does that sound strange? It was. And I loved every minute on the frontiers. I especially loved the horror of it all. Let me ask you, what are the 3 scariest words to read? My vote goes to those I read in Peter's chapters, when remarking on the sounds he hears in the forest at night. Only people weep. Sorry if the Peter stuff is a bit vague, I just don't really want to spoil this for anyone. I I want desperately for you to have the experience I had reading it for the first time. Stellar. Only people weep. Man, that got me. Maybe because I was reading in the dark. It reminded me of playing the forest, where you can hear the screams beyond your barricades in the night. That's not to say it was all horror. That would cheapen the real meat of Peter's story, which is, I think, a crisis of identity. A quick honourable mention to the letters from Peter to his father, an unexpected and rather beautiful twist. That was one of those quite literary moments that had me nodding like a proud dad. I haven't said much about Ambassador Renata, but her chapters were pretty amazing too. I suppose she's meant to be the main character, but I'm sure you can tell from this video I was way more into the other two. That's not to say her story thread was lacking. It was a grand adventure from Sova to the court of the merman, with every campaign between. She has a salvo of great characters on the team, and I loved the Merman City, which I found to be very Gungan, which is no bad thing. Her story included battles at port fortresses,
They're coming! There's a
and brushes with truly demonic forces, and it was very well balanced. And shout out to my man Lysander. Congratulations, you are very hot. I'm looking forward to seeing more of their story, and hoping for some real Napoleonic warfare stuff. Huge Total War fan. I appreciate that colonialization wasn't marvelised here, establishing categorical goodies and baddies. History's messy, chaotic, and this period was given the nuance it deserved. This book is one of threes. A third clever ambassadorial quest, a third green lieutenant in backcountry, and a third strange Gothic Victorian. I'm struggling to find a definitive summary of this story, as there really is so much to it. It's got Coppola, it's got Louis Stevenson. It's an interesting novel because it covers ground already well tread, but in a very different way. Think of The Age of Madness, for example. But where Joe used the Industrial Revolution as a backdrop and precursor for stakes, Richard has simply yet marvellously asked, what if an absolutely mental capitalist sought out dark magic for mass manufacturing? It gives new and terrifying meaning to the word progress. Finally, and I don't think this gets enough discussion for writers, naming things, people, places and so on. It's a real strength of Swan's, and the Stygian is yet another win here, though the streak may be considered at an end for the Irish readership when meeting the so-called Knackerman. You might ask, can you read this without having read the previous trilogy? I would say absolutely. In many ways, you can consider it like watching the original Star Wars trilogy before the prequels, or vice versa. There will be hints and nods, one or two winks to another story, but this is no safari through the past. It's all about what's happening now and what's to come. I'm not sure if this was the intention, or that 200 years passing between the original trilogy and this book just makes that a fact, but be in no doubt, this one's for you. It's usually after the first trilogy that a writer gets to try something new and different. Lesser of Gold, Babel, Daughter of Red Winter. I think you know what I mean. They've proved they can do it, and now they have some level of creative freedom. After book 2, I'd say my favourite book from an author is book 1 in the next series. In this case, I was right. So, any final thoughts? Love what you make what you love. Apparently that's the key ingredient to creative flow, and I feel Swan's flow in this book more than anything that's come before. This is the Sova he was built for, that he built it for. I'm glad he took the time to bring us here through Helena and Vonville, but it's here, now, with Renata and von Oldenburg, and of course poor Lieutenant Peter, that Richard is now home. He's arrived, and I'm so excited to get more. Thanks for watching. Cheers.